You're in the Business Insurance Zone with me, Steve Savant, national financial columnist and money color commentator. This week on The Biz, our long-term care series, and on today's show, our introduction into long-term care with special guest, nationally recognized long-term care expert, Stephen Forman, all here on The Biz.
When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome everyone to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm your host, Steve Savant, and we're broadcasting to a nationwide audience of financial advisors right here in Fountain Hills, Arizona, home of America's largest fountain. And with me today to talk all that is long-term care, Steve Forman. Well, welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, Steve.
Welcome. And I have to tell you, we look at so many things that are happening today in retirement.
Sure.
And one of the things that are in retirement right now is, how long am I going to live, and what kind of long-term care am I going to need? And a lot of people are saying, oh, I'm not worried about that anymore. Obamacare is going to take that.
Not true.
Not true. And then some people say, well, no problem. Medicaid's going to take care of that.
Not a good solution.
Not a good solution. It could happen, but it's not a good solution.
Yeah, there are better solutions.
There's better solutions. I've noticed that I just came off one of the mortality tables measuring how long people are living. I mean, Willard Scott says happy birthday to a handful of Americans that turn 100 every day. And if he took the time to say happy birthday, it would take him 90 minutes a day, 365 days a year for people turning 100. So we're going to be living a long time.
Yeah, in fact, I think it's funny you would mention that. I think he actually stopped doing the happy birthdays because it was taking too long. Yeah, the centenarians are becoming, the oldest old are one of the fastest growing demographics. So
we're going to be around for a little while. And
Absolutely.
I noticed a stat. I was looking at some long-term care stats. People were saying the average mortality into the early 90s for boomers, and that's what we're starting to look at now. We're starting to look at that.
Sure.
Non-smokers, of course, decent health, things of that nature. But when we look at that, we're looking at maybe laying out almost $250,000 out of pocket. And that seems to be the average, not the best, the most, but actually $250,000.
yeah, you know, and some of these retirement surveys, you have to be careful because some of them do not even include the cost of extended care. So be careful what you look at. But in the past, we used to be looking at people retiring at 65. That would be when they were looking at Medicare and thinking about retirement plans. And now we're looking at people working longer and retiring with not just 20 years ahead of them, but people that have to consider 20, 30, 40 years of retirement and a serious concern about not outliving their money. And so this is, extended care is a real serious concern.
Well, I'm looking at where money comes from when people actually have to pay out medical bills, pay out long-term care. I'm looking at some of this, and the number one place where most Americans do this, it comes from their savings accounts. So 75% of all that is coming directly out of pocket. And by the way, remember, they pay taxes on this already. So it's the net amount that we're talking about. Social Security is a second largest area where we have money to pay for long-term care, kind of convalescent care, all these things. This is coming out of actual my pocketbook, our Social Security, and then another one, we mentioned Medicare. It's not the best choice. It could happen, it could help, but it's not really the best choice. Talk about why that's such an issue.
Right, well, let's clarify. There's actually Medicare and Medicaid, as I'm sure you know, but I want to make sure that our listeners understand as well. Medicare is a program that it consists of Part A and Part B, and Part D is the drug program. Now that's something we are pretty much all going to get when we turn 65 if you've paid payroll taxes. Medicare primarily is a program that pays for doctor, hospital, but it doesn't pay for custodial care at home, which is the kind of care that most of us need as extended care. Medicaid is the program for primarily those of us who are indigent. It's a medical program for the impoverished. Now you might say to yourself, that's not something that you would consider yourself being if you're a successful person, and yet it pays about 9 out of 10 of all nursing home days. So it is primarily the largest payer of extended care costs in the country.
When I look at this, it looks like only 40% of the country at retirement has some form of long-term care benefit. This is a low number.
Actually, well, you know, and there's some dispute about what the penetration rate of long-term care insurance is. Some statistics say that the penetration rate is maybe 9 or 10%. If you ask Americans whether they own long-term care insurance, sometimes you'll see people reporting 15 to 20%, which suggests that people think they have the product and they don't actually have the product. And then other surveys suggest that it might be as high as 50%, and we get those numbers when we consider the actual market for long-term care, which may be the actual market when we consider who can health qualify, who has the finances, who's in the right age demographic. Perhaps the market is only really as large as 15 to 20 million Americans, and when we look at it from that perspective, perhaps penetration rate is as high as 50%.
Well, when I look at some of these other ideas, I mean, think of this: 18% of Americans had to sell their home because they just needed the money for their long-term care expenses. And I'm looking at 4% declared bankruptcy to pay the bill.
In fact, I'm going to agree with you that medical bankruptcies due to medical circumstances, that is the number one reason for bankruptcy. There was a cover story on Time within the last month called The Bitter Pill, which is looking at healthcare costs in America, which did suggest that medical reasons are the number one reason for bankruptcy. But I'm glad you mentioned homes, because our homes, our equity in our homes is the number one source where we are keeping our assets. And that plays into Medicaid, because I think the median home value of a home in America is somewhere between about $180,000 to $230,000.
Yeah, when I think about our home paying the bill, it's going to be that's going to be tough. People are trying to do reverse mortgages just for income.
Yes.
So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about some of these stats and give you some of the basics of long-term care.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome back to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm Steve Savant with Steve Forman. And remember, you can order today's materials at thebiz.tv. And just a heads up, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always consult your tax advisor and broker-dealer compliance department. We're introducing you to long-term care with long-term care expert Stephen Forman. Stephen, we're talking about our homes. I mean, this is the #1 asset in America. I don't want to do anything wrong that I shouldn't be doing. Talk a little bit about this, because we're looking at people having to sell their homes to pay for their long-term care.
Well, right. What I wanted to talk about with the homes is it's the #1 asset that most of us have, and if you consider that the median home value of a home in America is between about $180,000 to $230,000, let's compare that with Medicaid. Now, Medicaid, the home equity exemption in order to qualify for Medicaid is $500,000 in almost all states. In some states, it's as high as $750,000. Now, this presents an actual problem, because with Medicaid's exemption at $500,000, it actually means that most of our homes are not at risk in order to qualify for Medicaid. And with nothing real at risk, it means that most people do not plan. With nothing at risk, we fail to plan. When we fail to plan, we plan to fail. And that's why so many people tend to put off, delay, postpone an actual viable plan for long-term care.
And when that happens, here's the #1 phobia for seniors in LTC. They say they don't want to be a burden to their family.
Absolutely true. They don't want to be a burden to their family. At the same time, they're afraid of not outliving their assets. So this kind of presents a conundrum. They say, I don't want to outlive my assets, which says to you, I'm planning on living a long life. But at the same time, if someone says to you, Steve, I'm planning on living a long life, we have to accept something. I'm planning on living a long life. If you plan to live a long life, is it possible you might get frail? If it's possible you might get frail, then is it possible you may need extended care? It is. So if you need extended care, do you know what extended care is? I might ask someone.
Yeah, you know what, Steve? I don't think people know this. I mean, when we think of long-term care, I think nursing home.
Right.
That's all I think.
No, it's not. So extended care, I want to think about it in a different way. Nursing home, it's not nursing homes, it's not a place, it's not a location, it's not a kind of care. Extended care instead is a life-changing event. I want to think about it in a new term. But let's get away from long-term care because the term is kind of confounded now with ideas that people have. It's a bad connotation. Instead, extended care is a life-changing event that can have catastrophic consequences for your wife or your family and your ability to maintain your financial commitments in retirement. We're going to start thinking about it in that regard.
Well, when I look at it, I mean, I've heard phrases like this is assisted living. There's home care.
Yes.
There's nursing home care.
Yes.
There's adult daycare.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about this kind of this is the quilt. You know,
Yes.
these are the patches that we make this big quilt on because
Yes.
it falls under long-term care.
Yes, these are all locations where one could receive care, but primarily the damage is done at home. Because nursing home, assisted living, these are all places, infrastructures where care can be provided. But somebody that the care recipient, that's not where the damage is. The damage is felt around that person by the caregivers. Caregiving can cause the caregiver to become chronically ill. With all respect, if something happens to me, my life doesn't end. Life ends for the people around me. My wife could become chronically ill taking care of me. My son or daughter may have to quit their job, drop everything, and not be able to take care of their financial commitments to take care of me. So too often we focus on the person, on the primary earner, but in fact, it has a ripple effect on those around them. So it's not so much where care can be received as it is the consequences, both financial, emotional, and physical, on those around somebody.
Now, when we're looking at this, I mean, because people are going to hear this show, and they respond heavily to Medicare, Social Security. This is just another piece of senior living that we need to really accommodate in our thinking. So when I'm looking at all these things you just said, I'm like, well, I thought my long-term care insurance was just to take care of that issue, but it sounds like it's way broader than that from your point of view.
Yes, it's actually something. Long-term care insurance, extended care insurance, is designed to bring the family, is designed to make them whole and to bring them back to a state before the extended care event occurred. You know, too often financial planners tend to work on an asset and income portfolio and fail to move to the next step, which is an asset and income protection portfolio. So that's...
Now, my mind would think, why would that not be in reverse? Why wouldn't you be doing defensive planning first before you would do any kind of asset building or growth or income?
Well, I should hope that more planners do that. But according to the statistics that we find, a lot of CFPs, financial advisors, are simply not comfortable bringing up these kinds of questions too often because, as you know, long-term care insurance is medically underwritten, and that's kind of there's a disconnect. They're not comfortable asking these kinds of questions with their clients, which is why we find that a lot of advisors tend to partner with a long-term care expert.
Well, when I think about it, this is what we're planning. It's part of senior living. We have to incorporate this. If you're really a planner out there, you need to be thinking about long-term care. And remember, you can watch this show and all our shows by clicking the red on-demand video button right on our show's homepage at thebiz.tv. Well, that's the Buzz on the Biz for today. Get in the zone, the business insurance zone.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.